Hey everyone, it's me, Angela Walters from Quilting is My Therapy. Welcome to the most recent video in the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along, Echoes and Curves. Last week, when we worked on the all-over serpentine line design, we did exactly what the name implied. We quilted it all over the quilt without taking the piecing into consideration. But this week, we're going to be using the piecing or the fabric design as our guide to create a geometric design that combines straight lines and serpentine lines. Let's just say we're going to get a lot of practice using our rulers in this week's challenge. Before starting with this design, you're going to look at your quilt or your panel and decide what it is that you want to show off. Those sections can be anything you want. Just remember, what you echo is what you're going to be showing off. So make sure it's a fabric or a quilt block that you like. Now you could go ahead and mark out your sections and kind of decide beforehand if you like a game plan, or you could just make it up as you go along, kind of like I like to do. Once I have my section decided, I'm going to define my area by stitching in the ditch. Now we know I like stitching in the ditch, it helps me move around an area, but what it's doing here is creating that boundary that we're going to fill in. The sections that you create don't have to be perfectly shaped. When I get to this point, I have a little bit of a different end over here. Since I already know how to fill in irregular areas with the serpentine line, it's okay if I have to make my shapes a little different. After I've stitched in the ditch, I'm going to add some echo lines. Now, echoing is just going to help reinforce that shape, help really show it off, and separate the sections from each other. I also like to use echoing to make the spaces a little bit more manageable. You know, sometimes you bite off a bigger chunk than you can handle. Echo those sides to make it a little bit smaller and easier to quilt. Now, the number of times you echo is completely up to you. I usually do about once or twice. And if you like, you don't have to echo on both sides. You could just echo on one side. What I love about this technique or this design is that we're going to really use it to highlight the piecing on our quilt. This is perfect if I want to show off the pattern or the secondary design of the quilt. Also, this design lets you take those bigger areas and break them up into chunks, which can make it a little bit more manageable when it comes to the quilting. After I'm done echoing, my space is defined, and now I'm going to fill it in with those beautiful serpentine lines. Of course, you can fill in the space with any design that you'd like. Wishbones would be great, swirls, but since we're working on serpentine lines, I'll go ahead and stick with that theme. The idea here is to fill in that space with a different shape to really make that section stand out. This beautiful contrast is going to make those straight lines pop from the serpentine lines. Once that area is all filled in, it's time to do it again, making another section, defining the boundary, echoing it, and filling it in. Now, let's talk about tips for stitching in the ditch and for ruler work. One thing that I like to do when I'm echoing or stitching along the seam is to work in short increments. I'm not just quilting one straight line, I'm kind of adjusting as I go. You have to remember that what's going to be more noticeable is the unquilted area between those lines, so even if you don't love how it's looking, it's going to be fine. Look ahead of where you're at. Don't look right at your needle, and I know this is something I say a lot, but it's so important. It's so much easier when you can see where you're going and can make adjustments accordingly. And of course, using a matching thread color really comes in handy. When it comes to stitching in the ditch and the echo lines, I don't necessarily want the thread itself to show up. I want that unquilted area in between to really pop. So using a matching thread color is really going to help. Now sometimes I might end up on one side of the area when I want to be on the other side. And in some instances, I might not want to travel along a line because I've already done it a couple times. If I need to get to the other side without traveling, I'm going to quilt a serpentine line that will get me over there. Then once I'm hitting that edge, that's when I can go ahead and stitch in the ditch, add any echoing, and then continue filling it in. If you're not comfortable using rulers, or if this design seems a little overwhelming to you, start with smaller sections first. That will let you kind of tiptoe into the design and see if you like it. After you've done a few, if you decided that ruler quilting isn't for you or you don't love this design, just switch to the all-over filler design we did last week. If you happen to find yourself with an area that's too small to add serpentine lines or another section, just add more echo lines to fill it in. And you can see that I've got that section all filled in. Now, as I'm continuing throughout the quilt, I don't have to always follow the piecing. I can use the quilting to create the shape that I want to fill in. The important thing to remember is that I want an enclosed space. I want to define my boundary and then fill it in. So I really need to use the quilting to create the shape I'm going to fill in by making sure that it's defined and enclosed so that I can add those beautiful serpentine lines. I have another beautiful section to fill in, quilting those serpentine lines, filling in that irregular area as much as possible, and then continuing on. Now, when it comes to actually using this on your quilt, there's a couple different ways you could approach it. I've already said that I like to kind of make it up as I go along, but if you wanted to, you could do all your straight line quilting first and then come back in and add your curves. This is a great option if you're more the type of quilter that likes to focus on one design and then move on. Now this technique is pretty basic in how it goes together, right? You're just creating your sections and filling them in. But you can do a lot of fun variations with this. Try making your sections different sizes, using different fillers, or different thread colors. All right, now it's your turn. If you're quilting along with me on the custom challenge panel, go ahead and fill in the rest of your quilt with this design, or if you don't want to do rulers, you can use that all over design we learned last week. Now on my panel, as I quilted my sections, I actually alternated thread color. In one, I would use purple, and then in the next one, I used a bone colored thread. So I'm using the thread colors to kind of create some different texture. If you aren't quilting along with me on the panel, you can go ahead and mark out areas on your quilt sandwich to fill in. You could also use the designs on your fabric as the guidelines to fill in. For example, you can use the stripes on this fabric as a way to practice filling in serpentine lines, or you could practice quilting those serpentine lines in those irregular areas on a fabric like this. And don't forget, I have a downloadable quilting tip sheet that you can print out and keep next to you. And in next week's bonus video, I'm going to give you suggestions and ideas for quilting the optional borders for your panel. Well, thank you so much for watching. Happy quilting!